Hot wax dripped onto open flames while apprentices stirred vats of boiling tallow, just inches from wooden walls. Every medieval candlemaker's workshop was a tinderbox waiting to explode. Yet somehow these craftsmen produced millions of candles without burning down entire neighborhoods. What fire prevention secrets allowed them to work with molten materials in buildings made entirely of wood and thatch? Medieval candles weren't just about light, they were about time, prayer, and survival through the darkest months of winter. A single candle represented hours of dangerous work with scalding materials in workshops that seemed designed to catch fire. Church altars demanded perfect white candles that burned without smoke or drip. Noble households required candles that lasted through entire evening feasts. Common folk needed cheap tallow candles that provided just enough light to finish essential tasks after sunset. But creating any of these candles meant working with fire, molten wax, and highly flammable materials in conditions that would terrify modern safety inspectors. The candlemaker's workshop occupied a unique position in medieval towns, typically located away from the main market square, but close enough to attract customers. These workshops had to balance accessibility with safety, since a fire in a candlemaker's shop could spread to neighboring buildings within minutes. The buildings themselves were constructed with fire prevention in mind, featuring stone floors, thick walls with minimal wooden elements, and carefully positioned openings for ventilation and emergency escape. Inside these workshops, the air was thick with the smell of melting tallow, beeswax, and the herbs used to scent expensive candles. Large copper cauldrons dominated the workspace, suspended over carefully controlled fires that had to be hot enough to melt wax, but not so hot as to ignite the flammable vapors that rose from the molten material. Wooden racks lined the walls, holding hundreds of candles in various stages of completion, while stone tables provided safe surfaces for the detailed work that fine candle making required. The most striking feature of any candlemaker's workshop was the elaborate system of fire prevention measures that surrounded every work area. Sand buckets were positioned at regular intervals, ready to smother flames or absorb spilled wax. Wet cloths hung from hooks near each workstation, available to beat down small fires before they could spread. Heavy leather aprons and gloves protected workers from splashing wax, while stone platforms under each cauldron prevented burning materials from reaching wooden floor supports. But these visible precautions were just the beginning of the complex safety protocols that kept these workshops operational. The Chandlers Guild, one of the most strictly regulated craft organizations in medieval Europe, controlled every aspect of candlemaking with rules that prioritized fire safety above profit. Guild regulations specified the exact construction requirements for candlemaking workshops, including minimum distances between work areas, mandatory ventilation systems, and detailed protocols for handling and storing flammable materials. Apprentices spent their first year learning not candlemaking techniques, but fire prevention and emergency procedures. Master chandlers were required to maintain detailed records of every fire incident, no matter how small, and guild inspectors made regular visits to ensure that safety standards were being maintained. The guild also controlled access to the highest quality materials, particularly pure beeswax, which burned cleaner and safer than cheaper alternatives. Members who violated safety protocols faced fines, suspension, or complete expulsion from the trade. But beyond these formal regulations, the guild preserved centuries of accumulated knowledge about working safely with fire and molten materials, techniques that were passed down through generations of careful apprenticeship training. The financial stakes of fire prevention were enormous for medieval candle makers. A single workshop fire could destroy not only the building and equipment, but also months of accumulated inventory and the specialized tools that took years to acquire. Insurance didn't exist in the modern sense, so a fire often meant complete financial ruin. This reality drove candle makers to invest heavily in prevention measures that might seem excessive, but which made the difference between prosperity and disaster. Creating candles from animal tallow required techniques that pushed fire safety to its limits. Tallow, rendered from beef or mutton fat, had to be heated to precise temperatures to achieve the right consistency for candle making. Too cool, and it wouldn't flow properly into molds. Too hot, and it would smoke, sputter, and potentially ignite. Master chandlers learned to judge tallow temperature by sight, sound, and smell, recognizing the subtle signs that indicated when the material was ready for use. The rendering process itself was one of the most dangerous aspects of candle making. Raw animal fat was chopped into small pieces and slowly heated in large cauldrons, releasing moisture and impurities in a process that could take hours. Steam rose continuously from the rendering vats, creating humidity that had to be managed carefully to prevent condensation from dripping back into the hot fat and causing dangerous spattering. Apprentices learned to stir the rendering tallow with long wooden paddles, keeping the material moving to prevent hot spots that could ignite without warning. Temperature control was achieved through careful management of the fire beneath each cauldron. Experienced chandlers used different types of wood to create fires with specific heat characteristics. Hardwoods for steady, long-burning fires, and softer woods for quick temperature adjustments. The fire had to be constantly tended, with fuel added gradually to maintain consistent heat, without creating flames that rose too high or burned too hot. Skilled workers could maintain perfect rendering temperatures for hours, producing tallow with the exact consistency needed for different types of candles. Working with pure beeswax required entirely different techniques and safety measures. Beeswax melted at lower temperatures than tallow, making it somewhat safer to work with, but its higher value meant that any waste or fire damage represented significant financial losses. Beeswax candles were luxury items, often commissioned for church ceremonies or wealthy households, and the standards for quality were correspondingly high. Beeswax had to be carefully purified before it could be used for candle making. Raw wax from beehives contained honey residue, pollen, and other impurities that had to be removed through a complex process of melting, filtering, and cooling. This purification work was typically done in smaller quantities than tallow processing, using specialized equipment designed for precision rather than volume. The filtering process required multiple stages, with the wax passed through progressively finer screens and cloths to remove all traces of foreign material. The techniques for working with beeswax were closely guarded trade secrets, passed down through guild apprenticeships and refined over generations of practice. Master chandlers knew exactly how to heat beeswax to make it workable without destroying its natural properties, how to add coloring agents without compromising the candle's burning characteristics, and how to create the perfect wick-to-wax ratio that would ensure even burning without excessive dripping or smoking. But perhaps most importantly, they understood how to work with this valuable material without the catastrophic fires that could destroy both product and workshop. The social hierarchy of medieval society was reflected in every aspect of candle production and use. Peasants and common laborers made do with rushlights, simple devices where peeled rushes were dipped in animal fat and burned like primitive candles. These provided minimal light and had to be replaced frequently, but they were cheap enough for even the poorest households to afford. Merchants and craftsmen could afford proper tallow candles, which burned longer and brighter than rushlights, but still produced smoke and had an unpleasant odor. These candles were functional rather than beautiful, made quickly and sold cheaply to serve the basic lighting needs of working families. The quality varied considerably depending on the skill of the chandler and the grade of tallow used. But even the best tallow candles were smoky and smelly compared to their beeswax alternatives. The wealthy demanded beeswax candles, which burned cleanly with minimal smoke and no unpleasant odor. These candles could be made in elaborate shapes, scented with expensive imported aromatics, and decorated with colored wax or embedded ornaments. The finest beeswax candles were works of art, as much as functional objects, displayed prominently in manor houses and used for special occasions where their superior light quality could be properly appreciated. The church represented the largest and most demanding market for high-quality candles. Catholic liturgy required specific types of candles for different ceremonies, all made from pure beeswax and manufactured according to strict religious specifications. Altar candles had to burn for exact periods of time. Processional candles needed to remain lit while being carried through churches, and votive candles required consistent burning characteristics that would ensure they lasted for the intended prayer periods. Meeting these requirements demanded not just technical skill, but deep understanding of how different candle designs would perform under various conditions. Medieval building codes and fire prevention laws shaped every aspect of candle-making operations. Cities that had experienced major fires often banned certain types of workshops from operating within the city walls, forcing chandlers to locate their businesses in designated areas where fires would be less likely to spread to important buildings. These regulations created economic pressures that influenced both workshop design and production methods. Some cities required chandlers to pay special taxes or fees that helped fund firefighting equipment and personnel. Others mandated specific safety equipment or building modifications that added to the cost of setting up and operating a candle-making workshop. These requirements varied significantly from place to place, creating a complex regulatory environment that skilled chandlers had to navigate while still maintaining profitable operations. The enforcement of fire safety regulations was often inconsistent, depending on local politics and the influence of different craft guilds. Chandlers who maintained good relationships with city officials might receive warnings about violations, while those who fell out of favor could face strict enforcement that threatened their livelihoods. This reality encouraged chandlers to exceed minimum safety requirements and to maintain workshops that were models of fire prevention, not just to avoid regulatory problems but to build reputations that would protect them if accidents occurred. The seasonal rhythms of candle making were driven by both supply and demand factors that shaped the entire industry. Raw materials were most readily available during autumn slaughter seasons, when large quantities of animal fat became available for rendering into tallow. This created intense production periods, when chandlers worked long hours to process tallow, while it was fresh and convert it into finished candles that could be stored for later sale. Winter months brought peak demand for candles as daylight hours shortened, and artificial lighting became essential for extended work and social activities. This seasonal demand pattern meant that successful chandlers had to produce and store large inventories during summer and autumn, then distribute them during winter when transportation might be difficult, but demand was highest. The storage requirements created additional fire hazards, as warehouses full of flammable candles had to be protected against both accidental fires and deliberate arson. Spring and summer were traditionally times for workshop maintenance, equipment repair, and apprentice training. With lower production demands, master chandlers could focus on refining their techniques, experimenting with new materials or methods, and preparing for the next production cycle. This seasonal rhythm also provided opportunities for guild meetings, trade negotiations, and the complex social interactions that maintained the professional networks essential to medieval craft production. The tools and equipment used in medieval candle-making workshops represented centuries of refinement and adaptation to the unique challenges of working with fire and molten materials. Every tool was designed not just for efficiency, but for safety in an environment where a single mistake could cause catastrophic fires. These tools were significant investments that master chandlers accumulated over their careers and passed down to their successors. The most essential equipment was the rendering cauldrons, massive copper or iron vessels that could hold large quantities of tallow or wax while distributing heat evenly. These cauldrons were suspended from strong iron frameworks that allowed them to be positioned precisely over fires and moved quickly in case of emergency. The best cauldrons were made by specialized metal workers who understood the exact requirements of candle making, creating vessels that would heat materials uniformly while minimizing the risk of hotspots that could cause fires. Stirring paddles, ladles, and other utensils were carved from specific types of wood that wouldn't impart flavors to the wax or create splinters that could cause accidents. These tools were often family heirlooms, worn smooth by years of use and shaped perfectly for the hands of their users. Master chandlers maintained their tools with obsessive care, since the quality of the finished candles depended as much on proper equipment as on skilled technique. Molds for shaping candles were made from various materials depending on the type of candles being produced. Simple tallow candles might be formed in basic clay or wooden molds, while elaborate beeswax candles required precision molds made from metal or specially prepared plaster. The most valuable molds were those used for church candles, which had to produce candles of exact dimensions and perfect consistency. These molds were guild property, maintained collectively and used only by qualified master chandlers who had demonstrated both technical skill and absolute reliability. The knowledge and techniques developed in medieval candle-making workshops laid the foundation for lighting technology that remained essentially unchanged for centuries. The principles these craftsmen mastered, controlling temperature, managing flammable materials, creating consistent products from natural ingredients, influenced manufacturing practices long after medieval society ended. Modern candle making still relies on many concepts first perfected in guild workshops, adapted to new materials and modern safety standards, but fundamentally similar in approach. The fire prevention methods pioneered by medieval chandlers became models for other industries working with hazardous materials. Their systematic approaches to risk management, emergency preparation, and worker training established precedents that influenced everything from metallurgy to chemical processing. The guild system that regulated candle making also created professional standards and quality control methods that evolved into modern industrial safety practices. Understanding how medieval candle makers worked without burning down their workshops reveals a world where practical necessity drove remarkable innovation in safety and quality control. These craftsmen developed solutions to complex technical problems using simple tools and natural materials, creating lighting products that served their communities for generations. Their workshops were places where ancient knowledge was refined and preserved, where apprentices learned skills that would serve them for life, and where the balance between productivity and safety was carefully maintained through every aspect of daily work. The next time you light a candle, whether it's for ambiance, ceremony, or emergency lighting, remember the medieval chandlers who first figured out how to work safely with fire and molten wax. They operated without modern safety equipment, without chemical fire suppressants, without even reliable emergency services, yet they created workshops so well designed that many operated for generations without major accidents. Their legacy lives on not just in the candles that light our homes, but in the fundamental understanding that working with hazardous materials requires respect, skill, and constant vigilance. If you enjoy the hidden sides of medieval life, hit subscribe and give this video a like.